What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a P.O. Box, and Locals, Patreon. And all of these, all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to, provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. Let me start off by giving a shout out to RPK for making this introduction, Neil, and thank you and welcome. I've been looking forward to speaking with you for a while, so I'm glad that things happen when they're meant to happen. So I think it's a perfect timing for this conversation. And let me start off before I turn it over to you. Yesterday I had Ed Dowd on, and Ed and I, talked offline for a minute or two, and he goes, "Yeah, pretty quiet around here these days, right?" Or something along the lines of that, because everything that transpired over the weekend with Powell and with Venezuela over the last couple of weeks, and just Minneapolis, and it's like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, what is going on? So, Neil, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be on, and it's interesting. Talking before we get started. After a while, it's like, why don't we just open the mics? This is ridiculous.
we literally, so people that are listening, we spent 10 minutes saying, oh, we should talk about this, we should talk about that, we should talk about this. Okay, well, we might as well pause our personal conversation for a minute and let's get the clock running and start talking about things. So what's at the top of your mind right now, Neil? I mean, you're very well versed. You do a lot of different things. You woke up this morning. Today is Tuesday, or January 13th. What was on your mind? This episode is brought to you by Vaulted. Launched by McIlvaney Financial Group. With Vaulted, I literally just tap a button and bam, I own physical gold stored in a professional vault. I can also take delivery at any time. Extremely simple and less expensive than any other method. The do-it-yourself way to buy precious metals. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to vaulted.blbvux.net/coffeeandamike. I mean, look at how easy this is. The Vaulted app on my phone, I can access it at any time.
Actually, markets. One thing that's new about my life lately. I write books. I think a lot about history. I think about generations. I think about fiscal issues. I'm a demographer, so I think about aging, and all of these things. But lately, my day job is working with Hedgeye as a financial advisor, and I started an ETF. So, and if you actually have a fund that you're running, I didn't realize this a couple of months ago when I started it, but you really have to think about markets all the time. And I realized why these people have all kinds of gastrointestinal issues, because you always have to think about, when did the market open and what was happening overnight in Asia and all that stuff. So that's kind of new in my life. But it's interesting because you can talk a lot about markets in the abstract, where you think the economy is going and so on. But when you actually, when you're responsible for the money, it lends it a tangibility. You know what I mean? It's you can't have abstractions about it anymore. You need to know what's happening with everything because you're responsible for it. So that's the answer to your question. What did I wake up thinking about? But it has been a remarkable week, but haven't these all been remarkable weeks over this past year, right? With the new president in. And I mean, Venezuela, Greenland, Denmark, Iran, Minneapolis. I mean, you did highlight them. We now have the populist Trump this morning giving a call to Elizabeth Warren. Apparently, the two are agreed. about the credit card interest rate, about the credit card interest rate cap, right? Um, which is amazing, isn't it? You now have Trump proposing the same thing that the what he always called the crazy left wing weirdos have always wanted, right? And in fact, I think Elizabeth Warren, who was the primary backer of the um, uh, that Financial Protection Bureau, the setup that Trump basically dismantled. I think that mainly what she was trying to do. The thing with housing, I don't know. We didn't talk about that. What do you think about housing? Obviously, the price of housing continues to be a real problem for young home buyers, and the leading solution that Trump has is to subsidize and stimulate demand. Right? Get the FHA, get Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to buy all kinds of debt, bring down interest rates, bring down mortgage rates, prevent Blackstone from, owning houses, all this stuff. And what does that remind you of? Solving a problem by stimulating demand. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. The 10 to 15 year failed policy of trying to get more people into college by subsidizing loans. What did that do? You have a fixed number of spots at Ivy League and near Ivy League colleges, right? So what did subsidizing loans do? It just pushed tuitions up. It was a bonanza for all these colleges, right? All the money flowed in because the government was subsidizing its musical chairs. You only have so many spots. The solution is to expand the supply of legitimate credentialed universities that offer equality education. We did have actually an education secretary back in G.W. Bush way back then who actually advocated that, and she was quickly dismissed. I think she left the post because the colleges immediately said, this is completely, what are you talking about? Expanding supply, competition? Forget that, right? And Trump is doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing that the left tried to do with colleges. And what it does is just inflates the prices and doesn't do anybody any good. All of the subsidizing of demand for housing is just going to push the price of housing up. And all of these mortgage subsidies get capitalized into the higher price of the house. Anyone who covers housing knows this, and they've been quoted now in the press as for saying this. You need to expand the supply of housing. You need to go into the various states. I mean, if I were Trump, what I would propose is some sort of federal program. And, Trump is kind of your emergency guy, right? He could do this. He could say, we're going to go into all these states. We're going to declare a housing emergency, and we're going to start bulldozing through all of the various NIMBY things that you're doing to prevent the construction of new housing in your communities. Why do you think Americans continue to move from the Northeast and the upper Midwest and the West Coast to the South and the Southeast? To where you live, right? You're there in Phoenix. That's one of the largest growing metropolitan areas. And why are they moving there? Because the price of housing is so much cheaper. Why is it so much cheaper? Because for better or for worse, and sometimes I think it's for worse, these states don't put much regulation on the marginal cost of building new homes, right? Anyway, I'll open with that.
So I want to go back. I want to go back to the credit cards. Fixing the rates for a period of 1 year, because I don't. And the irony, Pocahontas, and now they're working together. It's like we're in a superhero movie, Neil. I've said this on every episode because I'm getting like my X feed flooded with the idea of Trump is behind the scenes like a superhero. But it feels like we're in a superhero movie right now. Like this is the Avengers or Netflix reality. Jack Ryan, Jason Bourne. I don't know. Pick James Bond. Pick one of them. But I feel like that's where we're at. So now you've got Trump and Elizabeth Warren, which I was not aware of this call. But how can he do that? How can he just do an executive order or make these institutions drop their APR to 10% for 1 year? Don't you have to? Doesn't that have to be put into law?
Well, that actually gets to a constitutional issue, which the Supreme Court is trying to figure out, and that is the Supreme Court seems to favor the idea of the unitary executive, which means that the president should have complete power over all of the agencies within the executive branch, right? You can't have divided loyalty. So he can basically now begin to direct or replace commissioners to do his bidding, right, on everything in the federal branch. On the other hand, because the Supreme Court also believes in the major questions doctrine, the Chevron doctrine, they also believe that the Congress should be much more explicit in setting rules independently of the agencies. You see what I mean? So I think what the Supreme Court really envisions for how we should change how we function in terms of legislative branch and executive branch is that the executive branch should have complete power over with less scope. Does that make sense? In other words, Congress can't just set up an environmental agency and just say, we give you power to regulate the environment however you want, do whatever you think is necessary. That I think that the way the Supreme Court now thinks of it, that is abrogating its duty to actually legislate. Congress can't just set up a regulatory administration and say, okay, we set you up to basically govern the United States. Come up with all the laws and regulations you think necessary. We're all going to go to Bahamas, and we're going to hang out there. I mean, no, Congress can't do that. I mean, that's obviously a stupid extreme, but I'm saying this is where the Supreme Court is going. Congress needs to be more explicit in its laws, but once they're in the executive branch, the president has greater power. And the interesting question on whether or not the president or these commissions can put a cap on interest rates is basically, has Congress ever given an agency that power? And if Supreme Court finds that Congress did give that explicit power, then probably Trump could do it or do it, through one of his commissions. I guess that's my quick answer to your question. Slow answer.
Well, and it makes me wonder then too, would the government then be subsidizing the differential because, and the devil will be in the details, but you've got so much debt out there on the individual that they're already carrying, X amount, whatever that mean number is or median number is, average per household. How are you going to say it's, I don't know what it is, but 23% or 27%, whatever this APR, let's say 20, make it even number. How do you bring that number down, and how is it going to be subsidized, the difference to these institutions?
Well, it won't be. It'll come out of MasterCard and Visa and all the banks that are in that agreement. And it should be actually mostly out of the banks, a little bit out of the big credit card companies. Again, I have to pay attention to financial markets, but I don't know if you've seen MasterCard and Visa. Their prices have definitely been way down the last two days, right? So partly it's going to come out of their earnings, right? At least that's the expectation, and it's going to come out of the earnings of the banks they're sponsoring. But they can probably handle that, and that they'll be more careful about they won't offer the same kind of frills and benefits to maybe the credit card owners, all the travel miles and all the cashbacks and all that stuff, and maybe a bit more picky. One thing it probably will do is mean that you'll be a lot more stingy about who gets to have a credit card. Just simply push everyone more to buy now, pay later, and cash cards, and right. Younger people have already moved substantially toward the non-credit or cash card economy, right? It'll simply hasten the completion of that.
Yeah, we'll come back around to housing, but the buy now, pay later is just baffling to me. And like, I have friends who have kids that are teenagers, and they use this. Well, they use Grubhub to have their food delivered. I don't know if they necessarily use buy now, pay later, but I've had people on, friend Lax Ganapathy of Unicus Research on Substack, and she does a big deep dive on a buy now, pay later, and people grow up and they use Grubhub. They do buy now, pay later for Grubhub and Uber Eats
and for groceries and for pay your utility bill. I mean, you think if you can't budget that in advance, you think kind of how are you living, right? But people say I'm busy, I'm harassed, I need to do this right away, and I'll sit down later when I have time to think about it. Then on the other hand, a lot of these are non-interest bearing, at least for a while. It's obviously a way for people to get into trouble, no question about that. But on the other hand, we got a nation addicted to gambling of people who can't afford it. I mean, how do you explain that?
All right, let's go down this road then for a second. We'll go all the way out, Neil. We'll go into deep water and then we'll work our way back. So the gambling thing, that's a whole nother. Now I'm going to be 48 in a few months. So I grew up in the era where, my dad had a passion for gambling, so to speak. Bookies, and go to somebody's house and there'd be like 4 phones on the kitchen table. And I remember being a small child saying, why does he have all these phones on his kitchen table? Like Sunday, the phones are ringing off the hook, and you go to Vegas and Atlantic City, right? Now it's unbelievable because, every major city has gambling. I mean, I remember, growing up in Ohio, Wheeling, they had got slot machines. That was a big deal. But now every city has them. And then you have apps to do any kind of betting. And then you saw recently with the baseball scandals of these, I don't know what they're called, prop bets, or these pitchers. 2 of them are from Cleveland, which I'm going to assume it's much deeper than that. And then to take it a step further, politics. You can literally bet on political races all over the world.
Yeah, well, we got poly markets now, right? Which a big new company set up by friends of Donald Trump, actually. And interestingly, I don't know if you know this about polymarket, you get into these arguments. Apparently, one big bet on polymarkets was people were going to pay off if there was an invasion of Venezuela. Well, it turned out that the people at the head of polymarket said it wasn't an invasion. They were in there for less than 24 hours. It was an extraction, but not an invasion. Well, I mean, think about that, right? So you're going to get into this kind of stuff, how to categorize things. A lot of countries bar this kind of event betting for the very reason that you could easily imagine people helping to bring about an event. I mean, God forbid. I mean, imagine an assassination or a bomb going off. I mean, imagine people making money off that. There was a big, I don't know if you recall this, but on October 7th, you remember when the Hamas attack into Israel, there were a lot of charges that a lot of people were shorting Israeli equities just hours before the attack. Well, okay, you can't really prevent people from going into financial markets, but I think that's what gives you, in other words, someone knew about it, probably someone who had access to Hamas planning. Was it someone in Tehran, maybe? Was it someone in the Gulf states? But they were shorting Israeli securities, right, before the attack. Well, you understand where I'm going with this. Highly dangerous when you think of the full consequences of that. It tempts people to engage in all the wrong kinds of behavior, right? You have to be careful about these things. We no longer are careful about anything. Let it rip. I think that really is sort of America's motto today. If people want to do it, let it rip, right? I think it's terrible that public policy aids and abets, legalizes and encourages gambling. I think it rips off mostly the people who can afford it least. And it says them probably all the wrong messages about what you need to do to be better off in life. I sound like an old Puritan, right? Like Calvin Coolidge or something. But my God, I remember growing up in a country where, yeah, you could gamble. You could gamble on a college game, and you could gamble on a pro game. I remember NFL, there's gambling. but it was suppressed. It was small time. It was informal because you couldn't do it legally. What's going on now is unbelievable, and it's gonna ruin sports, as it already has ruined collegiate sports, in my opinion. Just following the steps of what happened in the 1920s, we're going to see it again.
Well, and this is this showing our full decay? You know, as our society is just continuing to rot and deteriorate. And you know, to what you said about college. Well, I'm going to go to pro for a second because you know I said earlier I can't believe it's just limited to these two pitchers in Cleveland that we're betting. I'm sure this thing is much deeper. And then the Otani thing. I don't have any evidence of this. I don't have any proof. I'm going to be assumptive for a second, Neil. You know, the whole gambling, I think it was his interpreter that was quote unquote gambling for him.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if I believe that. And
yeah,
I mean,
I agree with
he's
that.
carrying two countries on his back for baseball. They can't have this guy go down for gambling. But also, how many of these college athletes that are broke? I guarantee you the betting is probably so deep with these kids.
Well, I mean, and just think about just the whole infrastructure and economy that's taking place in families across America to get their kid into college, train them. You know what I'm talking about? All the club sports, all the enormous amount of money that people have spent. That's another kind of lottery, right? Because my kid is going to eventually be, going to make a lot of money in pro sports or at the very least get into some fancy college. Just think about the money that's wasted on that. Um, Talk about a bad bet. But I do think that I yeah I I do think it's corrupting. I mean, I don't know what else can you say about it? Um,
And how can you turn it around at this point? And even you know, with the
oh,
NIL and the
I know how
trans.
it turns around. I mean, it turns around like it turned around eventually after the Black Sox scandal, right? In other words, everyone just suddenly gets sickened at all this, and then also I'll tell you another thing that's going to turn around because I think about this a lot in history. It's going to turn around when the market, I'm talking about the S&P, is maybe 30% below what it is today. That just changes everyone's outlook. You know what I mean? It's like, what the hell were we thinking? It's no longer house money anymore, right? And everyone becomes a little bit more severe about what goes on. That's when, by the way, after the crash and fall of 1929, America became a lot more severe about gambling, right? When it went underground, to a much greater degree than it was in the 1920s. Along with all the buying stocks on margin and a lot of other stuff that was very popular in the 20s. That whole mentality went down. Um, so yeah, this is sometimes good things are created out of adversity.
Well, and the parallels that you've shared in your work from that period to where we are now, it's just now you have technology that makes it just so much more accessible to people where they don't have to go anywhere. They literally don't have to leave.
That's true. And the dependency on technology and the fact that we no longer know how anything works. I'm actually doing a book now. It's under contract with Simon and Schuster. As my last book was on The Fourth Turning is Here. And the single biggest question I got from that book was, okay, Neil, I believe everything you say about where the world is going. What can I do about it? How can I prepare? And so I'm doing another book on this, uh, something with a half facetious title, like, how to prepare for the end of the world, that kind of thing. But when you think about how we would respond to a real crisis, and of course we can think about all kinds of crises. We can think about wars. We can think about external wars. We can think about internal wars. Certainly, I think that's now a possibility. And we can think about real financial adversity, right? How would we all respond? And think about the fact that equity markets have now become our retirement package. I mean, think about how vastly fundamental financial markets are for everyone's life planning in a way which absolutely wasn't true in 1929. I mean, just imagine that crash brought our entire economy to a halt. But back then, it was just a few people off in the corner playing with this stuff, right? Now it's like everybody, and I mean every millennial, they're their default option is to go into this 401k, and it's all being put in these passive funds that are going throughout, either a global ETF or to the entire fortune to the entire S&P 500, right? So all of these things are just being fed into the market. If that goes down, how do we react? But the point you raise about our dependence on technology is this. What if the technology goes out? What if the electric grid goes down, right? What if all those we talk a lot about the Chinese malware, and all those SCADA systems and everything that underlies our infrastructure. What if that stuff is activated? What if this stuff starts shutting down? Who understands how anything works anymore, right? Who understands how their electricity works, where they get their water from, where their food comes from? I mean, do we think about that? I mean, the typical American, the typical thing they buy at the grocery store has traveled 1,500 miles before they, get to it and purchase it. And none of it is being stored in the store anymore. That stuff is now just-in-time delivery. It's delivered directly to the shelves. Those grocery stores are going to be out of groceries in hours, right? And the next place you can get anything stored is way outside the city center. What are we going to do? How many young people even know what's under the hood of their car? I think a lot about these issues today, right? We have become so abjectly dependent upon this life cycle infrastructure that we all enjoy. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I just pushed that button, right? I press that on my screen and I get what's it delivered. That's about as much as anyone thinks anymore about where anyone comes from. Does this ever scare you, Mike? I mean, do you ever think about this? This kind of complete and utter dependence and lack of knowledge about how anything is actually produced.
I'm smirking while you're describing that because I've had Craig Fuller from FreightWaves on my show several times, and he started his channel I don't know a couple of years ago, and it was about supply chain. And when he started it, people are like, "Who's going to want to watch anything about supply chain? Nobody cares about supply chain." And every time I start talking to him, I laugh because I start off with that. Well, who would ever want to watch anything about supply chain, which is so relevant today? And we, and really, COVID was what opened my eyes, and the GFC opened my eyes about the financial system and how it's like one big Ponzi scheme back in 2008. Because I had moved to Arizona in 2006, and I was working in retail banking, doing home equity lines for everybody that was coming in, buying a house.
Wow.
Growing 100%
You
loan
were
to
part
value.
of the problem back then. You were getting everyone addicted to all those low doc mortgages.
I was on the tail end of it, Neil.
Yeah,
I was out of the beginning.
I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to hear any of this.
What's funny is I had no idea. And, I just moved here. I was working for a friend. Well, what was interesting about it was,
You will repeat that at the Nuremberg trial.
right.
I had no idea.
But, being how intimidated I was moving from Northeast Ohio to Phoenix, Vegas was another hot spot where everybody was buying properties like crazy. Like just everybody had a condo, everybody, The Big Short's become one of my new favorite movies. And, that scene with Steve Carell is with the stripper. And she's like, yeah, I have 4 houses and a condo. Everybody had a condo out here. They had multiple houses and a condo, and they just buy, max out. The appraiser would hit the number that was needed by coincidence, I'm sure. They'd come in and do their HELOCs. So there's that from the 2008. That's when I realized the financial system was totally cooked after all that. That was my first exposure to it. And what did the Fed do? As you know, I mean, they just came in, and I use the analogy, the Dig Dug video game. Like you'd pump the oxygen into I think it was Dig Dug, but they pumped the oxygen into the creatures that blew them up, almost blew them up. And that's what they did with the financial, all these banks. But the supply chain side, I never really considered it until you started seeing, after during the pandemic, the shelves just started to be empty. Toilet paper was gone, paper towels. And now still,
But we should have known about it because a lot was being written about the China shock, in terms of unemployment across a lot of middle America, right? But we never thought of the other side of that. It's not just that those people were rendered unemployed, it's that now we've substituted products made here, products made in the other end of the world, right? And it's not until that chain is disrupted that you notice that part of it, right? We noticed the unemployment part right away, or at least earlier. But during COVID, we suddenly noticed, oh my God, none of our pharmaceuticals are made here. None of these machines are made here. Even those little oximeters, that you put on your fingers that everyone needed. Oh, gee, they aren't made here. That kind of thing.
well, and then also too, when Hurricane Helene happened, my friend Molly James, who's got a practice now, I believe it's in several states, but she went out from Missouri to North Carolina to help, and she pointed out like some people's diabetic, their insulin was triggered by Wi-Fi, some
Ah,
type of release, and because there was no electricity, you don't realize that these, because it's tied to the network, it went down. So people weren't getting their treatment. They weren't getting their insulin. I'm kind of butchering this, but it woke me up the idea of no electricity. What will people do? How will people react to that?
yeah, actually that makes me think of that famous series of novels. I think it was by Michael Forster, maybe butchering his name here, but it was 2008, 2009. He wrote those when the first fear about EMP started emerging, right? That someone might actually, let loose EMPs and shut down our entire electrical system. But a lot of the subplot involved the fact that he had a daughter with type 1 diabetes who eventually died. I mean, it was one of the more moving parts of the novel because of course everything shut down and you couldn't get insulin anymore. But these are the things we need to be thinking about. Absolutely no one thinks about these things. We used to have uh, in the early post-war era an enormous civil defense establishment who thought about this. They actually thought about shelters, moving people out of cities in an emergency. They had lots of programs. If you go on, there's actually 1955, 1956. They show how Portland, Oregon, in 1 hour can have all of its people, and they actually tested this. They all get into their cars, and they actually moved out of the city in 2 hours. Um, we completely dismantled that in the 60s and 70s. We said, you couldn't do anything anyway. It's not used. And then what little remained went to FEMA. And then when the Cold War ended, FEMA got even rid of that, right? So there is no civil defense in America anymore. And what's interesting, Michael, is that part of the reason that America is particularly like this is that we have no experience with being invaded or being conquered in times of war, right? Unless even ancestral experience, unless you hearken your ancestors back to the South in the American Civil War, we have no experience in our history. Most of the rest of the world does, and it's very interesting lately when you have this, the threat from China and the war in Ukraine. The rest of the world is busy with civil defense. You look at Europe now; they are all spending billions of dollars enlarging these old Cold War shelters they used to have. They turned them into shopping malls and ice skating rinks, and now they're actually turning them into shelters again. And Finland has these enormous caves under Helsinki that they've enlarged now. They have room for practically everyone in Helsinki to basically go underground. All the Baltic states, from Lithuania to Estonia, Poland, Germany, Switzerland has shelter space for every Swiss citizen, with everything, filtered air and all this stuff. In America, we have nothing. Russia has it. China is building these enormous areas underground. America, we have nothing. We don't even have subways in most cities. You can't even, we have agreed not to talk about it. In a lot of these European countries, Michael, they're actually sending out now these guides to every household about what you should have in a war emergency. You need to have cash on hand, you need to have food, and so on. FEMA does have a circular that's sort of on their website saying every American should be self-sufficient, for several days, 4 or 5 days, but no one reads it. This is what amazes me, right? America is the target of probably more weapons than any other place on earth. You know what I mean? And partly because it's our role to defend this peaceful world order. At least that's what we've taken that burden upon ourselves. But we've got all kinds of nations that are targeting us. But we are the least likely to do anything about it, even to think about it. We don't even have we don't even pretend to have civil defense in this country. And the reason I bring that up is I think is just one other way in which we just don't like to think about this. In other words, is it just denial? Maybe there's a way to turn around and ask you a question. Is it something about institutional failure? Is it just that Americans just say, I prefer not to think about it?
Well, the thought that comes into my head when you say that is, are Americans wishful thinkers, and they think in the end it's always going to be a happy ending. It'll work itself out. It'll all take care of itself. That's what I think.
It may, but God knows after how much suffering. In other words, that's always the motivation to prepare, right? Yeah. Will it always work itself out, right?
I don't share that optimism this time around. I mean, things always eventually work themselves out. It might not be the outcome that you and I want, but they will work themselves out. But I don't see the happy ending this time around.
You remember the celebrated chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, who's a famous quote attributed to him, which is that Providence has a special solicitude for drunkards, small children, and the United States of America. So that, in other words, that's every Europeans have always, I think, been familiar with this attitude. America has been a very fortunate country. Peaceful neighbors, generally on the north and south, fish on the east and west. I mean, what's not to like about that? And it was George Washington in his original farewell address who first started talking about the advantages of what he called America's remote situation, right? We did not have to get involved in the French Revolution and all these wars in Europe and all that, right? Because of our remote situation. The problem is we no longer have a remote situation. We're enormously engaged in the rest of the economy. We're enormously indebted now to the rest of the world economically. And we're hugely vulnerable to everything from cyber attacks to drones to hypersonic missiles and God knows what else, right? The homeland is no longer safe. And yet our current president constantly talks about the big, beautiful ocean, right? I mean, that's what he says to Zelensky, we don't have to worry about what you have to worry about because we got this big, beautiful ocean. What do you think about that? Is that what Americans still think? We have this big, beautiful ocean. We just don't have to think about that stuff.
So you talked about how the new book that you're working on, and a woman I know, the grocery store that I shop at, came up to me the other day. I've been going in there for a long time, and she was freaking out and very, very worried, and doesn't pay attention to this stuff, like you and I do. And not to compare myself to you, but in terms of like what's going on in the world, markets, economics. And she literally over the weekend was having a really hard time, like in regards to what occurred in Venezuela and what's happening in Minneapolis. And she's like, "What should I do? What should I do? What should I do?" Now, this is just somebody, that I know, Neil, that, like knows what I do and was freaked out. And so it's, you're writing your book. Do you feel like people, like this is just one example, but do you feel like people are realizing that maybe they don't understand stuff we've talked about for the last 40 minutes, but something is off. Something is just
Oh,
off.
yeah. Look, I mean, the whole prepping industry, is just crazy now, right? I mean, how much that's expanded, right? The and look, I'm the impetus behind prepping. I'm all in favor of it because I think it's great when people think seriously about what they can do. I think my take on it is a little bit different, slightly different from the preppers. I think that my take on it is it's not going to be simply like we're going to go from a society of you know Gilmore Girls to Left Behind. You know what I mean?
Mad
Like,
Max, Mad Max,
yeah,
and Red
exactly.
Red
Mad,
Red Red
just
Dawn.
just simply switch from one to the other, and then who's ready, right? That's not how it
Red
works.
Dawn, where the Russians just land in the. I love that movie, by the way.
Well,
Did you ever see that movie?
actually, but yes, I know, but that actually seems a rather friendly apocalypse compared to a fungi, taking over the world, right? I mean, think about all of the horrible apocalyptic things we see now. But my point is the likely emergency we're going to get into is going to roll out in real time, and it's going to be gradations, and it's going to be different institutions breaking down, probably in very severe ways. But it's not simply going to be everything is going to work, and then yeah, Mad Max, right? That's not what it's going to be like. It's going to be very unlikely it will be like that, and that's sort of that's my take. And the way I plan to lay this out, by the way, after a long introduction, sort of taking people into what we're facing, is more of a 12-step program, because I think 12-step programs are ideal for kind of uh, reality therapy when you really need to take something that's very difficult for people to grasp and simply introduce it in little bits. What you really need to do for people, like the women you just talked about, is give them a sense of agency. Most people have no sense of agency. In other words, if I am totally dependent on all these things, like I'm going to order my dinner tonight, punch a button, right? Then the idea that it's all going to break down, you have no idea what you can do, right? What you need to do is bit by bit begin to tell people there are things they can do. There are ways they can learn. There are skills they can acquire. There are things they can do at their home. They begin to think about where they're going to locate their life, how they're going to live. In other words, you can step by step get people to deal with this realistically. And the great thing is, Michael, is if nothing happens, you'll still be a better person, and you'll probably be a more effective, knowledgeable, capable person than you would have been otherwise, able to respond to all kinds of emergencies, even trivial ones, because you'll really know how everything around you works. It's a little bit like Pascal's wager. He used to say, make a bet on God, because if God exists, that'll be the right bet. But if God doesn't exist, you'll still probably lead a happier life. You'll make more friends, and you'll probably have fewer regrets, right? And that's what I think we have to realize, that facing up to these things, because they are real, will benefit you whether they happen or not.
But also, too, geographically, like I've been one of the worst places you could be. And I didn't tell her that, but, if you want to be a prepper, Phoenix is not a good place because it gets to be 190 degrees here in the summer. And
You're
if
out
there,
in the middle of the desert. Yeah. Humanity was not meant to live in the middle of the desert without a lot of infrastructure. I think we can agree on that.
Well, but if the infrastructure goes down in July, and this,
I,
I was in Appalachia this summer in North Carolina in the mountains, and with visiting a friend of mine, West Jefferson, and the reality of it is, same like people said to me, well, you just go up to Flagstaff. Neil, I don't think they're going to welcome me with. First of all, you're not getting up. I don't know if you've been out here, but there's only one interstate to get up from Phoenix.
I know exactly where Flagstaff. Yeah, I grew up in the West. I
Oh
think
yeah,
I
yeah, so
told
yeah.
I know Flagstaff,
Don't-
and that would be a much nicer place. And by the way, I love Flagstaff. It's high enough to be cool. It's great. That's why they have university, at least part of the University of New Mexico up there, right?
and NAU, Northern Arizona University is up there. But those people,
Northern University.
they're not going to let you up there. If it gets to that point, they're first of all they'll probably blow up the bridge in Black Canyon City so you won't even be able to get across. And let's say I'm a runner, I'm a trail hiker. Maybe I could get up there. It'll take me a little while. I'm going to be met with some fierce resistance that's going to tell me go back down, or they might shoot me. I don't know. But they're not going to let me into their house.
No, but they will. You know why? You know what you're going to tell them? I'm a doctor. Oh, come on. I mean, you know the line. Come on. You need to be prepared, Michael. Come on. I mean, there are things you can trade, right? Everyone's going to want a doctor. There are probably other skills they want too. I remember my most interesting desert experience was at age 18. And this is something no child would ever be allowed to do today, right? This is one of those things where, you're talking to young people, said, please close your ears, right? But my friend and I, we just graduated high school, and we wanted to, just the two of us in a car, take a 30-day trip all the way around the United States in an old jalopy, like an old Volvo. I don't know if you remember those Volvos back then with the slanted roofs, and I don't know, maybe they still have them. Our family said, fine. And so our first night, we just, I don't know, camped out on the eastern side of the Sierras, near Lone Pine or Independence. You know what I'm talking about there. Beautiful, you see. And then we went into Death Valley. And we would just wanted to cruise around Death Valley. Now it was July, right? We had just graduated, right? It was like 125 degrees down
The hottest
there.
place in the world.
Yeah, it's the hottest place in the world. And we went out and we went on this little dirt road way out in the hill, and the car started overheating. You get that distinctive sound and a little steam coming out. And so the only way to cool the car, now here is where, this is where roughing it teaches survival skills at a young age. The only way we could cool the car is by turning all the heat on all the way. You've done that in a car, right? So you turn the heat on full blast. So here it was, 125 degrees with the heat, all the heat of the engine, coming at us. But it allowed us to keep the radiator cool enough to get out of there. We did the weirdest things. We went down along the Mississippi. We went to Birmingham. This was back when the civil rights was cooking. We had the weirdest experiences. Again, this is not something anyone would allow, their kid to do today. But I was thinking about the desert. Yeah, I learned to respect the desert, Michael.
You had the heat on and the windows rolled down too, so it's like 125.
Yeah, we had to. It was.
You got to catch that breeze, that little bit of breeze. Well, yeah, and that if I know I'm not in the best place to be if it gets to that point. Like this is not and they keep building here, Neil. That's what's crazy.
But Michael, you have your bug out location. Come on. I mean, I know you're not going to tell us, but just tell us you do. You don't have to tell us where it is.
No, I mean, I thought if I in July, let's say if the power were down and I was here, I mean, there's a place that I would go to in hopes that I could outlast the zombies, because there'd be a fight down here in the short term.
Well, just make the arrangements ahead of time. This is one of the messages I'm going to talk about in the book is kind of how you arrange just a few arrangements ahead of time. Getting a little bit of the community ahead of time makes all the difference in the world. And I know you want to talk about community too. So I raised that. the idea of community, of course, is absolute necessity if you want to actually survive in a crisis. And one of the things that's often under not emphasized enough by a lot of the prep writers, where it's all kind of personal survival, right? But you need a community to survive.
Yeah, let me ask you in regards to community and in particular to youth, because we talked about this earlier in regards to, gambling, but also with smartphones today and how people, young people, not just young people, but everybody's got their AirPods in, headphones, walking down the street, in and out of the stores, uh, no smiling, no engaging, no interaction. You say hi to somebody. More times than not, people say nothing, or they're glued to their phones or listening to their music, or whatever they're listening to. What you being a student of history, I know history repeats itself, but it's never the same the way it does. What would need to break in order to start that community process again to get people less engaged on these devices and back into the world?
Um, well, let me put it this way, and this is sort of the wisdom of almost every and ever since sociology was invented in the late 1800s, by people like Durkheim and Weber and Tönnies and all these many of them were German, some French, and a couple of Americans. They all came to the same discovery. One of the things these early sociologists were interested in the late 19th century was what happened to community. I mean, this was a time of huge urbanization. I mean, in Germany, these huge cities and all these workers were coming in and they were joining, Socialist Party and forming unions. Everyone was aware that the old community was disappearing, and you had these enormous aggregations of people who didn't feel community. So one of the original fixations of sociology, and it's remained a fixation ever since, was what gives rise to community and what breaks it down. And I will tell you, because it's something I've certainly talked about in my books, but all of them agree on the same thing. And even Robert Putnam, who's probably America's currently, he's the guy who wrote the book Bowling Alone. He's probably America's best known sociologist. They all agree on the same thing. The community in general is born out of adversity, and specifically, even more, it's born out of conflict. Full stop. I mean, that's like the rule of history. And I think it's very interesting that everyone, I think, now is familiar with how community breaks down because we've all been living it, right? Anyone who has any recollection of America, back in the 50s or 60s, those of us who are older, right, we remember what America was back then. We're all familiar with what seems to break community down. But almost no one is old enough to remember the processes that build community up. Obviously, community can't always just be breaking down all the time, right? There have to be processes that build it up. And this is conflict. If people want to understand why America in the late 1940s and 1950s was so fixated in community, and people really did leave their doors open, when they're in the suburban homes, they lent each other, tools. Everyone trusted everyone else with each other's kids. You know what I mean? Almost our image of a very homogenous, trusting American society. Where did we get that community? You cannot understand the late 40s and 1950s without focusing on the Great Depression and World War II. That was a huge community creator, right? That ordeal. And that comes back again and again in history. So I think the creation and dissolution of a community is almost like a long-term systole, diastole of the human heart. It comes back and it comes back. It will come back, but it won't come back in an era when anyone can just touch a cell phone and their food will appear and they can plug something in their ear and they'll get exactly all the music they want. People turn to community when they need community. And it's a shame because a lot of the habits built up will have to be broken and that will be painful. But I'll tell you, I mean, anyone who talks to predators in prison about how you go after people now, who are the easiest marks to mug? It's all the people with the cell phone, looking at this, the people who aren't aware of where they are, those are the targets, right? And my first advice for anyone in an urban environment is be aware, look like you actually have been here before, be looking around, meet other people's gazes, right? People will leave you alone because there's so many other vulnerable people to go after, right? But these are things that people used to know. They don't need to know now, but they will. All of these things can be relearned. But the desire for community, in some sense, is always there, right? Particularly among people coming of age. You come of age in your late teens, what do you want more than anything else? You no longer want to please your parents anymore. Who do you want to please? Your peers, right? So every generation coming of age gets rewired, right? According to their own generational community. And that's how new generational sensibilities are forged going forward. It is a community process. And when you think about community being effective in how our lives are led, let me tell you something, a very interesting major research paper. This was done about 8 or 9 years ago by a team of social scientists. And they went out and they looked at every zip code in the United States and they asked a question. They had a survey instrument and they asked people all over the United States all kinds of questions indicating how much community they had in their lives. And one of the basic questions was, how many neighbors how many next door neighbors, how many people living immediately around you do you know their name, right? And other questions about how often you meet them and so on. What they found, Micah, was interesting, and that is that the likelihood of knowing the immediate person living closest to you is inversely related to the population density of where you live. Fascinating, right? So you go down to New York City, you go down to Miami, you're living in these high rises with all these people that are just yards away from you. You have no idea who any of them are. But you come out and live with me out here in West Virginia, your closest neighbor is a quarter mile down the road. You always know who that person is. You see what I mean? Isn't that fascinating? The further away they are, the better you know them, the more you need to rely on them. And I think part of the reason is if you live in a big city, basically all of the infrastructure that's delivering all the necessities of life is kind of all socialized, right? I mean, you've got a transportation grid, you've got automatic heating, you've got all these services. Nothing ever breaks down. If it does break down, it takes some enormous utility that's going to come and fix it. The point is, you've got police, the point is that when you live in these much more depopulated areas, you are responsible for much. By the way, that infrastructure isn't nearly as big. It's not as costly. That's why tax rates are much lower out here, Michael. Let me just tell you, that's one of the great things about living out here where I do in West Virginia. There's just, you don't have to pay for much. People kind of take care of a lot of the stuff themselves. And what they do agree upon together to solve, everyone kind of knows each other personally about how to solve it, right? It's very efficient, it's very lean. But the real irony is, right, you have a lot more knowledge of what it takes to actually keep life going out here, and you have a lot more familiarity with the people around you. What I fear when you're talking about an emergency where a lot of that infrastructure gets shut down, what do people in these dense urban environments do? Starting with the unbelievable fact that they don't even know who's living in the walls immediately around them. I've had people tell me the most incredible stories of a steam leak in their room. Suddenly, one of them is two young women living together. They had some break. They weren't strong enough to actually close the valve. they went banging on people's doors and no one answered their door. And they all had, their TVs on or whatever. So they knew they were in there. This is scary, right? And the point is, how prepared is a world like that for anything untoward happening? I kind of shudder to think about it, right? Not only do people not know anything about what keeps them alive and what keeps them fed and housed and warmed and clothed and all that, but also none of them trust each other. None of them even know each other. Your comments, Michael. I mean,
well, I think that the pandemic also, coming back to that for a second, showed us how isolated people became, and I don't think we've come out of that in that mindset of being alone, you relying on Netflix for your comfort, Netflix, YouTube, porn,
AI, your
weed,
AI buddy,
weed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
that's in the gambling category. You can buy that stuff everywhere now too. I mean, most places.
Yeah, that's true.
But so in terms of how alone people are and how isolated, because the system is, and you can't tell me that's by accident that the state did that. Separate, divide, isolate, and make you dependent on, technology and the state. They don't want the community. They don't want people like you, Neil, talking to people like me. They don't want to know that there's places that you can move to where the community is strong. I saw it this summer when I was on my road trip. For 5.5 weeks, I drove to like a variety of places, and I saw it. It was amazing, because in urban areas you don't have that. People are too worried about their lattes and their yoga mats, Neil, in the urban areas.
Well, they have, ideally a lot of time to meditate alone. It's interesting you say that the state, a lot of it is simply corporate self-interest, right? One of the things that corporate America has done, because it's a much better profit model, is rather than sell you products and teach you how they work and how to fix them, they don't do that anymore. They sell you products that you're not supposed to understand so that you can always buy new ones, or better yet, just kind of rent it. You know what I mean? And they'll always fix it for you. In other words, the corporations find a better profit model is for you to be dependent and ignorant, because then you can't do anything about it when it shuts down and you just have to pay them more. You see what I'm talking about? It's certainly a very attractive a business model. And I think, unfortunately, that has also led to a lot of this dependence. And in fact, there are movements now, you might have seen them, there's some congressmen are actually supporting this, to force corporations to create automobile parts and so on that actually can be repaired. In other words, this is actually now a problem which people are actually organizing to solve. But I think it's terrible. You notice how increasingly, when you think about millennials and how they think about their ideal lifestyle, oh man, owning a home is just too much hassle. I actually prefer renting, right? And you might as well rent anything. Rent a car. I'll just rent my whole lifestyle. I won't own anything, because then I'll actually have to understand how it works. I'll just rent from different companies that will explain the benefits. This is scary to me. And ultimately, if you don't understand anything and you have no idea how anything works, and you don't even understand your own self-interest in a way, what kind of democracy are we going to have? What kind of independent judgment do you expect anyone to have about anything, including politics? Maybe I'm going a little bit too far afield here, but I do think that's kind of the end game.
Well, but also, the apartments today, at least the ones they're building out here, these aren't apartments, Neil. These are like hotels. These are bougie. Like, they have bars in them, and you see how swanky some of these places are with little studios. They have 2 bedrooms to studios to. It's unbelievable. What?
Well, just like colleges now, right? I mean, they've got to be like super outfitted summer camps with deluxe gyms and spas and so after a college like that, you need to attract young people to move into an apartment like that, right? Um, there has been some success among young people about getting things that are organized a little bit more like dorms, so that actually people have to actually interact with each other. Um, but I do think what is much more profitable and what a lot of these uh, multi-unit developers make is much more sort of the individualist model that you're talking about. Um, but but interestingly, what you talk about are the bars and the meeting rooms and so on is a little bit of a bow toward, of course, all young people's desire for community and a. desire to meet. Um, but again, it's meeting about issues that don't concern anything. I think you still have the complete dependence of these people on systems that they know nothing about. And the reason I bring that up, and I was only half joking when I talked about democracy. One of the reasons why, when even in the United States when it was first founded, why many of states did not allow people to vote who didn't own property was the idea that people that didn't own property were in a sense dependent on others, right? They couldn't exercise their own independent judgment, right? That's why people who didn't own something, once you owned something, like you owned a farm, you owned it, well, then you could be independent in your judgment. If you were simply a retainer of a powerful noble or you were an employee of a powerful manufacturer, you weren't independent in your judgment. And I think that is the fundamental foundation of democracy is you're taking citizens who can exercise independence. If you see where I'm coming from on this, and I do think the idea of developing independence is fundamental to our democracy. And if one thing that I sometimes worry about, look, I look at a lot of polling, and one thing you've seen over the last 10 years is that an increasing share of Americans don't really think democracy is that important. And this is particularly true among younger Americans. The biggest dissatisfaction or simple obliviousness, just not caring about democracy, is among young people. They don't really understand it. Why is, democracy is just about people arguing and fighting all the time and never getting anything done. And it's pretty good judgment about America today, right? But I think though, if you don't even have any hope that that idea works, well, maybe a benign dictatorship may not be a bad idea, right?
Well, so we going back to young people, and you know how different the young men are versus the young women, in my opinion. And my friend.
Spin that out a little bit, Michael. Let's
Well, I actually, I sometimes will come across people like out on a trail, like in the middle of a run, and in the last 2 weeks, actually the last 3 weeks, ironically, I've talked to like 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old mountain bikers, and I asked them specifically, and I'm going, referencing my friend Matt Smith, who lives in Uruguay, wrote a book with his son Maxim and Doug Casey called The Preparation, and his son did not go the traditional route of college. And he's got him on a trajectory, a plan, doing these different things and reading books and, kind of giving a little brief overview of it. It's an excellent book, by the way. But, the young guys that I've talked to, like one guy in particular, he wants to design engines for cars. He doesn't want to go to college. Neil, this kid was so excited to tell me about what he wanted to do. All he wanted to do was stay in his dad's garage and work on cars. His parents are making him go to school and live in a dorm. And I said, well, go in there with an open mind. You don't know where it's going to go. And, you'll meet a circle of people. And, you just come back to your parents whenever and, keep working on your stuff. But it was just to see that excitement in him. I was like, these young people aren't as demoralized as I thought they were, or maybe they're not at all. Girls, on the other hand, I don't know. I don't know, because these young girls and the social media and the Instagram and the agave they get from that attention, I don't know. I can't speak on that as much as I have for some of the young men that I've met. They're bypassing college. Met another guy the other day. He's going to be a motorcycle mechanic. I'm still waiting to meet a young guy that wants to be an elevator repairman. If I had to do it all over again, I would have become an elevator repairman. There's a lot of elevators out there.
Yeah, that's the growing industry of the 2030s, right? Elevators. I hadn't thought about that.
I've never met one. Have you ever met an elevator repairman?
No, it's like the Maytag repairman. Do you remember that? No business.
But there's so many elevators. I mean,
I don't think it's a growing business, Michael. I hate to say, I don't think it's a growing business. And of course, if you make the elevator really well, like the Maytag, right, you don't need many elevator repairmen. Mm. I have a little bit of a different take. My take is almost the other way around. I would say that the one trend you see among the women is that I think this is frankly partly biological. They're just a lot more mature at a lot younger age about what you need to succeed in life. Certainly much better prepared credentially in terms of earning a career, earning a wage. And a lot of the women I see, and one of the reasons why they're not getting married, one of the reasons why we're having fewer kids, is that there are a lot of women who just can't find a man worth marrying. I'll be honest with you, that is a viable long-term partner that is living up to their expectations. In most societies everywhere, again, I'm a demographer, I study this stuff, women want to marry up, right? They want to marry up. They want to marry someone who is, can take care of them, can help them, can pave the way for them, partly because they're going to have to spend part of their lives raising children. And this is the problem. All these men that you're enthusiastic about, apparently the women don't see them as long-term winners. I mean, this guy who wants to repair automobile engines in his garage, I absolutely think it's great. And I think it's great that something brings him joy. You always have to start with joy in something you do. And he may do it someday, but he doesn't probably feel any particular calendar about making that all come together in something that really works, for a viable life at any time soon, right? It's great to have young people forced into situations where they do things that maybe they don't want to do immediately because they don't know what they want yet, right? And the wonderful thing about young people is that they move a lot more. Or I should say that used to be one of the wonderful things about young people. Again, I look at demographic trends. You know what's most striking about America today, Michael? People are moving less. And I mean they're moving dramatically less.
You mean physically individual or moving geographically?
I just mean moving, changing residences. So if you look at America, and it's been about the same over the entire post-war era, when people move, it's about a third of the time changing within a county, and about a third of the time between counties within their own state, and about a third of the time between states. Okay, that's kind of how it parses up. Americans used to move a lot more than they do today. And the funny thing is that you look at this and everyone thinks that the 1950s and 1960s were sort of the staid America where nothing changed. On the contrary, America was on the move. They were moving twice as much, right, than they do today. Today, everyone's locked in. We have much, fewer startups today. I think business dynamism has declined in general. But the biggest alarm that I have with less moving is that the fall is greatest among the young. Obviously, young people move more than old people. They do in all eras, right? Because young people are still trying to experiment with life. Young people today aren't experimenting. And you can see that in the moving rates. A young person today, and I just looked at this, we got the new data out. A young person today moves about as much as a middle-aged person, a person aged 55 to 65, moved back in the 1960s. That's amazing to me. That's stunning. It just means that young people are staying safe. They're not taking risks. They're particularly staying closer to their parents. Why? Because their parents have all the money. We know about part of the inequality today in America is generational inequality. The kid comes home from college, they come home from their first job, they look at their parents' home, and here's the realization moment, right, for young people today. Mom, Dad, I just realized I'm never going to be able to afford this. You know what I mean? That's a stunning realization for younger generation. What does it mean? They stick more with their family. They stick closer to them. A record share, as we know, we saw this obviously during COVID, but it's still true after COVID. A record share live with their parents still. This is what saddens me because part of the American dream has always been young people doing what you just described, going out there, experimenting, and making a go of it and finding optimism among two people, a man and a woman, for example, going together and saying, you know what, we can make this work. Today, they're beginning to say, you know what, this really isn't going to work. I'm just going to stay where I am now.
What about on the girls' side? See, I disagree on the terms of, I feel like the feminist movement hurt that. Women have felt, they've gotten so into their careers that they haven't focused on family. They feel, I'll put that aside. They get entrenched with their companies. Women's, the thought process, I don't need a man. Now, maybe that is because they don't see the value on that they're
I
combination.
I think as a general characterization of women that was truer, 20, 30, 40 years ago. That was certainly the attitude of boomer women entering the workforce. I can do it myself and all this. I don't need a man. I think that's changed. I talk to a lot of young women, and a lot of it is I just can't find a guy who's in other words, all those career women you're talking about, they're looking for a guy that would be a match for them. They can't find it. Now, you might say, well, they're being too picky or whatever, maybe. But the biggest single complaint, and I go through these surveys where we look at all the reasons why women don't, not getting married, not having kids and all this. The single biggest reason is I can't find a partner. It's not, oh, I don't want to. I'm happy being alone. You know what I mean? It's not that.
And then do you think that comes back to the social anxiety that young people are facing today? Not all of them, but that are facing today, where they're more comfortable in front of their phones than going out and interacting and, rolling that dice in that regards.
I think a lot of it is the fact that our economy just doesn't make room for young people anymore. I think this has to do with the growing inequality of our economy, and particularly inequality that's based on age and generation. You know what Donald Trump said when people told him, you remember we were talking about this earlier, right? You just keep on, if your idea is to get more people houses by, inflating the demand for housing.
Perfect segue, Neil, because we were going to talk about housing, so we'll come back around, but go ahead.
Okay, we'll come back around. But look, I mean, that just drives up the price of housing. You see what I mean? It doesn't mean that anyone more is housed. It just means housing becomes more expensive. But when Trump was asked about that, he said something very interesting. He said, well, I like it that housing is expensive because these people who've lived there all their lives, they've made a lot of money on that. I want to protect that too. And I'm just thinking, you can't have it all ways. You can't protect boomers because their housing is so expensive and protect boomers because the stock market is so expensive. You're basically condemning every young people to buy into an expensive house, to buy into an absurdly expensive stock market where the price earnings ratios, that thing isn't going to grow much over the next decade. Probably it will decline, and it may decline a lot before it comes back again, right? but you're basically condemning this generation. The problem is when you have the leaders of the society saying that, young people are just going to have to suck it up and accept the fact that the older generation is going to protect these high values of stock markets, the high values of housing, and to keep healthcare really expensive because old people need a lot of that. I don't know. I don't see a lot of hope for that. I think a lot of this has to do with older people saying, you know what, we have to do things to expand supply, and regardless of what it does to our asset values, we have to make some room for younger people. Honestly.
Ed Dowd and I were talking about this yesterday, and I was able to share my views with him. And he looked at me like, I think he said bingo, because I had said, and I'll share this with you, and you tell me what if you agree or disagree. In my opinion, this administration was never interested in doing any mass deportations, because if they were, you could go after employers and landlords that house these people. And you could do this more quietly than the theatrics of Minneapolis and Chicago and Los Angeles with ICE agents and, assaults and what have you. People would leave mass exodus, in my opinion. You got to say in my opinion now for everything, Neil. But so, and if that were to occur, we would have a surplus of housing. We don't have a shortage. There's no shortage of houses here. But if these things were to take place, who would ultimately pay the price? The boomers, right? Their values would go down. They need to come down. Who are the voters, right? Who would suffer the consequences of it? Boomers. But it'd be good for Americans. It would bring things back to where they need to be. Young people could buy houses again.
Look, I look very carefully at the data we have, not just on border apprehensions, which I think is sort of difficult to read because you can't measure success on immigration by border apprehension. You just don't. You have no idea who's really crossing the border, right? There's so many ways people can cross and recross. What we look at is stuff such as the best one is a CPS survey that simply asks people, particularly workers, are you born in the United States or not? And that stopped growing. As we know, it hugely shot up during the first years of the Biden presidency, all up until about August of Biden's final year, when Biden finally realized he needed to enforce the borders. You remember that? That was kind of his last gasp. And so he started enforcing the borders. And that really worked. It stopped growing, began falling, and it's continued doing that during the first year of Trump. So there's no question that it's had an effect. And it certainly had an effect on places like, New York City, which unbelievable. We're actually paying hotels, to house these immigrants that were being bussed up from Texas and bussed up from Florida, by DeSantis and by, you remember that whole scene.
Yeah, with Abbott sending them.
Yeah,
Martha's Vineyard.
And I have no doubt that has been, a net blessing for the overall demand for housing units. I mean, it's just arithmetic in that way. So I'm sure that that's helped. I think where Trump has been told his enforcers to go easy on enforcement, I think is more to the employers that he favors. He really likes farmers and he really likes people in the hospitality industry because that's his industry. And so he's basically told ICE not to go after farmers or not to go after hospitality industry. I will say, though, that America will adjust to fewer immigrants. And as time goes on, this number is going to fall. And our economy will adjust to it. It's funny. If you remember back, 10 and 5 years ago, people are always saying we absolutely need all these immigrants because otherwise our beds won't get made. our lawns won't get mowed, our roofs won't get fixed. And what's really interesting, like I remember America in the 1950s as a child. There was very little immigration back then. There was a Bracero program, interestingly, in California, but very little overall immigration. And unbelievably, somehow the lawns got mowed, the beds got made, the roofs got repaired. But I'll tell you the one difference is that back then we paid those people more relative to top income earners than we do today. That was the difference. And you saw it in the income data, right? In other words, America became more equal in terms of income and wealth throughout the 40s, the 50s, on into the 60s, and the very early 1970s, it began to move the other way. And not coincidentally, I mean, there were a lot of other things going on too, with taxes, regulations, a lot of other stuff. But it was in the mid 1960s when immigration laws were liberalized. We had a lot more immigration coming in after that. It was only around the year 2000 when, unbelievably, the Democratic Party completely changed its line on immigration. Historically, going all the way back, the Democratic Party had been generally anti-immigration, and the Republican Party, for obvious reasons, was pro-immigration. Cheap workers for all of the factories, and the Republicans owned the factories, right? I mean, it made total sense. But weirdly, right around the year 2000, it was the Democrats who shifted to becoming the pro-immigration party. And we see one of the results is that with this new realignment that we've seen in American politics since 2016, is working class Democrats shifting from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, and higher income earning professionals and college graduates to some extent moving in the other direction. And I think that's reflecting economic interests. If you are higher income, you benefit by having cheap people around to mow your lawn and make your bed, right? I mean, it doesn't need a lot of explaining.
Well, and also, what about the H-1B factor, right? Like the legal immigration that's occurred here.
Well, this is something now, this is a big MAGA split, right? Because on the one hand, Trump thinks, oh my gosh, we got to make it easier for these skilled people to get in. But you can understand, MAGA doesn't like to think that it's going to allow, the populist side of MAGA, right? Not the pro-business side. I mean, Trump kind of represents two parts of the MAGA party. There's the sort of the pro-business casino side of MAGA, and then there's the real populist side. There's the Steve Bannon side, and maybe a little bit of the JD Vance side. There are those kinds of MAGA, right? And I think that the real populist side of MAGA says, no, we shouldn't make any special provision. We shouldn't have golden visas. We shouldn't have special professional visas, A1B visas, all of that stuff. Although from a populist point of view, it actually might be in their interest. There's no reason you're not going to be doing anything bad to a working class American to invite in, Indians who are going to move to Silicon Valley and be given, stock options to join the executive team of some new AI company. You know what I mean? That doesn't compete with working class Americans. So economically, I'm not sure it makes sense to oppose those visas. But culturally, you can see how that side of the MAGA party, the popular side of the MAGA party, does not want to give favors, right, to these highly credentialed foreigners.
Well, and it makes me wonder though too. It's much easier to get people to come in using the H-1B rather than having them illegally cross. So how much more is that shifted now to that route rather than the illegal route?
It's the numbers are so different. There's so much more on the unskilled illegal. The H-1B is just not. It doesn't really compete with it from a numbers point of view. We're talking about much smaller numbers with H-1B, right? So I'm not sure it really matters in total numbers.
Mm. But do you think when that process of what I said, in regards to how that would impact housing prices, would that by just doing the employ, because it is illegal to house and employ aliens, would that change the real estate to make it more affordable and bring prices down, if not dramatically down, in your view?
You mean go after every new homeowner and ask exactly
No, no,
what
no,
their
no.
preference is?
No, no, no. The employer or the landlord.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, directionally, it would be favorable, no question about it. It's kind of an interesting method of enforcement. Um, I you'd have to get landlords to do a lot of new work that they're unaccustomed to doing, right? Which is to go after suddenly all this ID and all of their tenants. I guess what you're saying is shouldn't the federal government do with landlords what it's now trying to do with businesses, right?
You're enforcing the law, right? You're enforcing the law, and this is not going to happen. I don't think you and I are talking about this. I don't realistically see this occurring. But to me, it's a more viable solution, and also you wouldn't have all these theatrics of what's going on in these cities that we've seen in the last year in regards to Los Angeles, Chicago, now Minneapolis. We saw in Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte turned into like a ghost town when ICE came through there. Supposedly they're coming to Phoenix. I can't even imagine with the amount of construction just in my little area I live in. If that occurs, there's so much work going on out here right now.
Well, it's also availability. You go out to these places, by the Home Depots and out on construction sites. You get the people right there. You got them. Then you can check them, but then it's easy to deport them. Your method of going after credentials, well, then maybe you found someone, but then you actually have to get that person, right? I don't know. I think what they're doing is I think the visibility is actually a feature, not a bug for them. In other words, you may think, oh, this is terrible PR for my city, but a lot of America looking on may say, Trump's doing something, right?
Yeah, I don't look at it like that. I look at it like in terms of it's just creating more of a divide, and you're seeing more violence and more unrest in these cities. Now, one thing about Trump
loves a divide. Divides work in his favor. It's my tribe versus their tribe, and this is what our tribe is doing. I mean, Donald Trump has already said, it's our America, their America. He said, what do we have to worry about is the enemy within. I mean, you need to come up with this. He has already said he's ruling for the America that's on the right side. And he's trying to wage a war to weaken, divide, and to some extent possibly get rid of the America that's on the wrong side. I think you really have to realize in this new age, polarization is exactly what works for Trump.
That's what I was going to say. One thing about him, like him or hate him, now mind you, I voted for him. The man thrives in chaos. He loves...
But even more than chaos, he thrives in conflict. But remember what I was saying about the fourth turning. It's all about conflict. And the great thing for Trump, and again, this doesn't mean whether you voted for him or against him, is that the conflict always works to his advantage because everyone sees him as the strong man you want when things are chaotic or in conflict. So the very fact that his emergencies cause the conflict always redounds to his benefit by saying, oh my God, things are really unsettled. I guess we need a guy like, oh yeah, Donald Trump. You see how it always works for him? I noticed that even in the last couple of years of the Biden presidency, as soon as Trump creates a controversy, and as soon as there seems to be chaos, Trump always benefited, even if Trump was the guy causing it.
Did you ever think when you wrote, the Fourth Turning and then the recent book last year, Fourth Turning is Here, that there would be a UFC event on the White House lawn? was that in your bingo card? You know about that, right? This summer, they're going to have a UFC fight.
Yeah, I know, and I think the guy who really was prescient in that was I think he was the guy who created Beavis and Butthead, right?
Mike
He
Judge.
did Idiocracy. Do you remember the movie Idiocracy? Idiocracy
I never
was
saw it. I mean, I used to
you
watch.
you need to see that movie. It's basically this. I can't remember when it came out, 2015. I think it was before Trump, but it was about what would happen to America when all high educated people stopped having babies and only, that was kind of it was the open, you can't even say kind of a racist predicate of the movie. It was kind of way out there. It was kind of this weird movie. You watched it back then, and basically, what our country would be like after 50 years, and it's basically like the top NASCAR driver is president of the United States, and like everything is dumbed down throughout America. And that's what I thought of when I thought of the UFC championship. I said, this is idiocracy. This is exactly, it's almost could have been taken out of the movie, actually. It's an interesting movie to watch in retrospect. Um, and, or you could say it's a little bit more like, bread and circuses, gladiatorial fighting, right? Um, Spectacle to divert the crowds.
I think of I hate to use movie. I love movies, and but now when I find because I'm always joking around, this is not a superhero movie because there's people that really believe that in the end, this is Tony Stark and Captain America are going to save the day. And it's even my friend Melody Wright, we've talked about. Did they put these superhero movies out for all these years to like condition us to because I mean with Elon and Tulsa, it was like X-Men, the way they were last year, like at the UFC event, they're walking down out of the tunnel like superheroes. But I think of the movie Gladiator when Joaquin Phoenix doesn't want to deal with anything from the Senate and decides they're going to do these games. And the two senators, one said he's foolish. One commented like, "Oh, he's foolish" or something, and the other one's like, "No, he's smarter than I thought." What is Rome? It's the mob. Give them violence, give them blood, and they will love him for it. And breads and circuses. This is where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. Keke et pane. I mean, this was the old idea of the empire. I mean, it started really in the late Republic. I mean, and ultimately in the empire, they actually built the big Colosseum. But it actually wasn't so much gladiator. The real sport of the Colosseum couldn't hold that many people, maybe 40,000. But in a Rome of 1 million, that wasn't much. What people loved to see most of all was the chariot races. I mean, they were held all the time, and they were enormous. That the stadium could hold, on close to 200,000 people. It would have held more than even, the I don't know the Michigan, University of Michigan Stadium or UCLA. And then people could watch it for free, even on the hills, nearby. They could watch these things, and they had the red team, the blue team, the yellow team, and the I can't remember the other, but they were all colored, and everyone in Rome rooted for one of these teams. It was oddly, it makes me think of, NFL fever a little bit in playoff time, like today. Uh, in some ways, we're very close to ancient Rome, and in some ways, we're obviously very different. But it does make you think. And of course, this was the urban population. These were the people who didn't farm, didn't know how to farm. These were not the people that were ever preferred for service in the army. They were considered too soft. When the army needed new recruits, they went to places like Illyria. They went into the mountains to get tough people. Yeah, they never went to Rome. I mean, these people were given up. So this really was sort of the weak heart of the Roman Empire, and that's kind of what they did to entertain themselves.
I know I'm running out of time here. Neil, you got to come back so we can chat more about this stuff.
Well, it's funny. We were talking before, and we just suddenly decided to just turn the sound on, right? It's like, why do we? It actually reminds me of Do you remember Larry King?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember Larry King interviewed Bill and me when I can't remember maybe Generations came out. It was the 1990s, and he had this big show. I think it was on CNN and so on. And so we went in. I learned something, by the way, about the art of podcasts. I'll share it with you right here, and you'll remember this now when talking with future guests. Because I came in and Larry King, he never read the book, right? He never reads any of it, but he sort of looked at it, said, oh, Generations looks kind of interesting. Oh, yeah, kind of interesting. What's it about? And so we began to explain a little bit of what's it about. And he suddenly said, stop, stop, puts the book down and says, let's get everything rolling. And he says, first lesson of show business, it never sounds as good as the first time. So remember that. It never sounds as good as the first time, right? You don't rehearse. You don't like talk about it first and then say it over again. It never sounds as good.
I had
So
oh, go ahead, sir.
pass that on because Larry King, I think he passed away, but he certainly had a knack for that business.
I had somebody write, and you know this better than I do. You get good feedback and bad feedback, but one of the comments that stuck out to me, it was a few years ago. I wasn't getting a lot of comments back then, but somebody said, "I feel like I'm sitting in a coffee house next to two people listening to them talk." And to this day, Neil, I swear to God, and I've got some great.
Was that, by the way? Did you consider that positive or negative?
I thought it was great because
What's the matter with that?
Well, and I told you earlier, like I'm not a journalist. I didn't go to school for this. I was like, wow, that's what I wanted. That was all I ever wanted to accomplish in terms of what I was doing here.
I like that.
I did too. And not that I get everything right. You don't get everything wrong, but just talking like this. Exactly. I could do this with you every month with you, Neil. I could, where can people find you?
Excuse me. Oh, we have we're on Substack, Demography Unplugged, and we do a podcast, audio podcast about once a week with my partner, my associate, Christian Ford, and I'm also with Hedgeye. I advise mainly institutions, but I do have, I can divulge, I do have a fourth turning ETF. This is actually, we just set it up right around Thanksgiving. So it's up there. You can look it up. It's called HEFT, Hedgeye Fourth Turning. It's doing well. It's off to a great start. And it is for people who know that there is trouble brewing in America. They want to be prepared for bad things happening in the world and in markets for this period we have to go through, hopefully to a better period beyond, right? But also people who just don't want to hang out in treasury bills, something that's totally safe, but that way they don't participate at all in the market. We attempt to give people the best of both worlds, right? They can participate in the market. We aim to protect them against bad things happening, and also to be invested in things which should do well in a challenged world. So that's it.
And your recent Substack, we didn't even get a chance to really talk about. We didn't get a chance to talk about it all, but how remote work, the impact that's having in the urban areas, in regards to, because remote work is not going away.
No, it's not. And
they're trying though. They're trying to get people. I have a friend works at Chase and was remote, and they just got to go to an office. Doesn't even work with any of her coworkers.
Yeah, well, it's Jamie Dimon, right? And he makes a big deal about how he wants everyone there, like he was always there, and everyone have to go through. They all have to be there because you got this magic thing that happens when people. Do you know what it's like to commute into and out of New York City? Maybe easy for Jamie Dimon. He probably has a helicopter, take him from the Hamptons, right down to.
And he's not clocking in. He's not clocking in at 8 o'clock, Neil. You know that.
Yeah, I know. And he's certainly not taking the subway, and he's not going through the Holland Tunnel. Anyway, my point is, these people who do full days in New York, they never see their kids. they never see their husbands or wife. You know what I mean? That's no way to live your life. And so if you can't, if you really want people to be there all the time, you can't have your business in New York City. I mean, just for starters, and then we can go on from there. I do think the biggest penalty for uh, away work, offsite work, is for young people. I do find that we talked about community earlier, right? Young people really do want to learn the business. They want to be around older people who know what they're doing. They want to learn. It's the older people who just say, look, I've been here enough. I don't, I'm no longer learning anything from being around these guys. I can live elsewhere. But I do find many of the younger ones say, I really do benefit by being around, but you don't need them there 5 days a week, right? You don't need them there every day, full time. So I do think the Jamie Dimons and all the others who insist on this are gradually bending to reality, right? We're in a new kind of work schedule. I think hybrid is becoming dominant, and there will always be industries such as tech and programming, which will be remote. Of course, maybe programming pretty soon won't even be remote. It'll just be all be done by AI. But that's the real remote, right? Where you're no longer even paying a person anymore. So, but anyway, next time we can talk about AI. I have a lot of thoughts about AI, so we could do that one. But this has been great. I really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it, Neil. And then for all that, feel or go subscribe to Neil's work on Substack, support him, what he's doing. I can't wait for the next book. And, I look forward to more conversations ahead.
Wonderful, Michael. Talk to you again soon.
Mic drop.